Welcome to Hire Power, the show where we cut through the noise and get real about hiring. I'm Kim Frost, founder of Frost Connections, and after 25 plus years in the search industry, I've seen what works and what absolutely doesn't. If you're a founder, CEO, VP, or HR leader who's tired of bad hires and ready to build a team that actually fits your culture and vision, you're in the right place. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Hire Power. I'm Kim Frost. Last week, I talked about the phrase cultural fit. You know, the infamous line hiring managers drop when they don't want to or can't explain why a candidate isn't moving forward. They weren't a cultural fit. And as I shared, one candidate pushed back and said, "How would they know? They only spent an hour with me." That moment has stuck with me for years because it reveals the problem. Companies say they hire for culture, but they can't define it. One of the first things I ask my clients is, what makes you different from your competitors? What do you think the answer is? Our culture. So then I ask, okay, tell me about your culture. What makes it different? Believe it or not, oftentimes they can't. So today we're going deeper. We're talking about something bigger, foundational, and often completely overlooked: your employee brand, your internal identity, the promise you make to your employees about what it feels like to work at your company. And I'm going to show you how a client went from chaotic hiring and high turnover to clarity, alignment, and better hires simply by defining their employer brand. When culture fit is just code for guessing, let's be honest about what culture fit means. We like them. They remind me of me in my younger years. They didn't make me feel uncomfortable. Well, guess what? That's not culture. That's chemistry. And chemistry is subjective. The danger? Chemistry feels like your gut. And you've probably heard the whole episode of why hiring off your gut is a terrible strategy, especially if your stomach is having a bad day. Hiring off gut feel leads to what I call accidental hiring or rushed hiring. Accidental hiring turns into accidental onboarding, and accidental onboarding turns into the first 6 to 12 months preventable turnover. Turnover that could have been avoided if the company had clarity on who thrives here, who struggles here, what behaviors we expect from everyone, which brings me to today's topic, your employee brand. Several years ago, we were working with a growing company that had high first-year turnover. They were so proud of their culture. They were super hip. They all got along. They were in a great industry. Everyone would say, "We're like family." But here's the truth. When everyone defines culture differently, you don't have a culture. You have chaos with a mission statement. So here was their issue. They interviewed based on vibe. They relied on cool personalities, not competencies. Every interviewer was looking for something different. One interview would say, "I like them. We could hang out. My favorite, can I have beers with them?" Another would say, "They seem too intense. There was no alignment, no standards, no structure." Finally, the CEO said something brilliant. "We don't have a hiring problem. We have a clarity problem." So they went through a process to articulate what makes our culture special, what behaviors are required to thrive here, what traits consistently lead to failure. And instead of a poster or a paragraph in the handbook, they actually put it into a documented employee brand guide. They had posters all over their office of each of the 5 words they identified was their culture. The CEO based this practice off of a book called Tribal Leadership. And yes, it was a while ago, but it was so impactful, and it was so impactful that I still remember it. What was it, 10, 15 years later? The CEO knew this was going to be a long process. She had to identify a team that comprised of someone from every group to ensure they had equal balance from the entire company. It didn't matter if that group had 2 people on their team or 20 people on their team. And she made sure that it all wasn't the same level. So, not all executives, not all first hires. She did a great job of finding that balance. Like I said, it wasn't easy. She recognized it, but she was dedicated. It took them a grueling, focused year of surveying, presenting, surveying, meetings, oftentimes feelings of uncomfortableness and uncomfortable conversations, but they got there. What happened? Easy breezy, right? Turnover dropped. And it wasn't because the company changed, it was because they stopped hiring for the wrong people. What's the difference here? Employee brand versus employer brand. Here's where companies get confused. They obsess over their employer brand. So that's outward facing. Career page, Glassdoor reviews, which are nonsense, recruiting, marketing. But the employee brand is internal. It defines who you are in that role in the company. It defines how people behave. It defines what success looks like for your company. Think of it this way. Your employer brand attracts people. Your employee brand keeps them, and you need both. But if your employee brand is weak, so will your hiring. So you need to pick 5 to 7 word test. Most high performing companies can define their culture in 5 to 7 words. Not objectives like innovative, collaboratives. Those are standards right now. Real employee brands use behaviors: curiosity, accountability, grit, urgency, stewardship. And here's the kicker: someone on the interview team must interview specifically for those characteristics. Not everybody, just one person who owns the cultural scorecard. You definitely have to have an interviewer focus on culture. That should be a competency of one of the interviews. When nobody owns culture in the interview, culture gets lost. So there's something I read on Harvard Business Review on Costco and the culture measured by behavior. They wrote about Costco's culture and employee brand. Costco doesn't just say we value people, they prove it. They promote from within, they invest in training, they pay well above the industry average. As HBR points out, that results in lower turnover and higher loyalty. Their culture isn't a slogan, it's a system. Culture sticks when it's reviewed regularly and tied to behaviors and outcomes. All of Costco's CEOs, they buy into this. They execute toward this. Otherwise, what happens? Your culture becomes a poster. It's pretty, but it's meaningless. So why does this matter to hiring? Your employee brand becomes the filter. You start interviewing people based on how they behave, how they make decisions, how they handle conflict, how they respond under pressure. Instead of, do I like them? Would I grab a beer with them? Because here's the truth. People don't quit jobs. They quit cultures that were never identified. Again, going back to a couple podcast episodes, professionals have told me they could be paid double, but the culture was so toxic or the culture wasn't there for them, they left. So here's your call to action. Can you tell I'm into that lately? Your assignment this week: write down 5 to 7 words that describe your culture. Not who you want to be, who you are today. Then ask your team to do the same privately. Here's your survey, right? You're starting your survey. If those lists don't match, you don't have a culture. You have a marketing brochure. And if you'd like help defining your employee brand or building a culture interview scorecard, DM me. My team and I do this every day. We turn guesswork into systems. So remember, employer brand attracts talent, employee brand keeps talent, cultural clarity prevents turnover. If your employee brand isn't identified, your hiring is random. Your hiring is all over the board. And random hiring leads to random results. And that client I mentioned earlier, one of their 5 words they landed on was love. Yes, love. And that's how the CEO said it. She spoke about this process at a conference. Guess what happened? She literally was mobbed with attendees after her presentation, ran up to her, introduced themselves, and said, "I'd love to work for you." Then I told her, "You know what? You don't need me anymore. This is your best recruiting tool." Thanks for listening. Make sure to follow the podcast, share it with leaders who need this message, and leave a review. It helps other people find the show. See you next week on Higher Power. That's it for this episode of Higher Power. If you're ready to hire smarter, connect with me at frostconnections.com or at LinkedIn at Kim Frost. And if you've got something to say about today's episode, follow the show and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Until next time, hire smart, lead better, and remember, how you hire is who you become. See you next week. No fluff, just better hires.